The ultimate question. Have you ever just stopped, maybe looking up at the night sky or just sitting quietly, and wondered, why? Why is there all this? Stars, trees, feelings, thoughts. Why is there anything instead of just nothing? It feels like a simple question, but perhaps it's the deepest one we can ask. For centuries, thinkers, philosophers, and scientists have explored this very question. Often, the answers point outwards. Some suggest a creator, a force or being that started everything. Others look to science, talking about the Big Bang, energy, and the laws of physics that govern the universe. And sometimes, people feel it's simply a mystery beyond our grasp. These explanations try to paint a picture of how things might have begun far back in time. Yet, for many of us, these answers might still leave a sense of incompleteness when we consider our own immediate experience of being alive, right here, right now. There is, however, another way to approach this profound question, offered over 2,500 years ago by the teacher known as the Buddha. His focus wasn't primarily on cosmology or a creation story. Instead, he turned attention inward, towards understanding how we experience the world and ourselves in each moment. How does something actually appear to us? What role does our own mind play in this process? The Buddha suggested that understanding the conditions that allow experience to happen right now is key. This path involves careful observation, seeing how things arise and pass away based on causes and conditions, and noticing our mind's reactions. It's a practical way to gain clarity and find a sense of peace amidst the constant flow of life. This perspective offers a different lens through which to view existence itself. Part 1. Why is there something? This fundamental question, why is there something rather than nothing, isn't just an abstract puzzle. It seems to arise naturally from our awareness. Thinkers have certainly felt its weight. Leibniz, a philosopher from centuries past, sought a sufficient reason for existence, concluding that God must be the ultimate explanation. Another philosopher, Heidegger, considered it the core question of metaphysics, believing that engaging with it reveals our basic relationship with being itself. This questioning reflects a deep human curiosity about our place in the grand scheme of things, a curiosity shared across cultures and times. Even in the time of the Buddha, people wrestled with similar questions about origins and ultimate reality. What fuels this persistent why? Perhaps it connects to our longing for meaning or permanence. We see the vastness of space, the cycle of seasons, the briefness of our own lives, and we wonder, is there something solid, something lasting underneath it all? We search for an anchor, a sense of purpose or stability in a universe that seems defined by constant change. This search for a fundamental why differs in nature from the primary focus of science. Science excels, with remarkable success, at explaining how. Consider the Big Bang model. It describes the universe expanding and cooling, how stars and galaxies formed. It describes processes governed by physical laws like gravity and electromagnetism. However, it doesn't typically address the absolute origin before the expansion, nor does it explain why these fundamental laws exist. Science operates powerfully within the framework of existence, describing its workings. The question of why there is a framework at all often lies beyond its current scope. So we see attempts to find a reason out there, an ultimate creator, fundamental laws. But the Buddha's path took a distinct turn, prompted not just by intellectual curiosity, but by the direct observation of dissatisfaction and impermanence in life. While acknowledging questions about origins, he saw limited practical value in speculating about unprovable first causes when immediate suffering needed attention. He recognized the limits of seeking a single starting point in the distant past or defining existence solely through external laws. Instead, he directed attention towards the immediate dynamics of experience. How do things actually come to be for us? How does the feeling of something, often tinged with unease or desire, arise in our consciousness moment by moment? His investigation shifted from finding a static, historical origin to observing the living present conditions, both external and internal, especially within the mind, that shape our reality and contribute to our suffering or peace. This focus on present conditions, driven by a compassionate aim to end suffering, becomes the crucial starting point for understanding his unique answer. Part 2. Where answers usually look. When searching for answers to why anything exists, people have explored different paths, often seeking a single ultimate source or principle. One path relies on the power of human thinking, using logic. Long ago, Aristotle observed chains of cause and effect, and reasoned there must be a prime mover, a first cause reached through logic. This contrasts with the Buddha's approach. While the Buddha also deeply analyzed cause and effect, the principle of dependent arising we'll look at later, his focus wasn't on logically deducing a single uncaused cause at the beginning of time. Instead, he emphasized observing the conditioned nature of phenomena arising and ceasing now, particularly how specific conditions lead to suffering, and how changing those conditions leads to its end. His path was less about proving a logical necessity and more about practical observation for liberation. Later thinkers like Immanuel Kant questioned if pure thinking could reach ultimate answers about origins. He suggested human reason has limits tied to experience. For Kant, questions about the absolute beginning fall into an unknowable area beyond our mental capacity. This resonates slightly with the Buddha's reluctance to engage in purely speculative metaphysics. He often set aside questions about the universe's ultimate finitude or infinitude, not because they were logically flawed, but because pondering them didn't lead towards ending suffering, which was his primary practical goal. His silence on certain metaphysical points stemmed from a focus on what was observable and useful for spiritual practice. Another major path uses scientific observation to describe how the universe works. Science maps out processes based on discovered physical laws, like Einstein's theories describing gravity or physics describing activity at the smallest scales. It powerfully details the what and how of the existence we can measure. The Buddha, too, was a keen observer, but his primary field of observation was the mind and its relationship to experience. While science observes external phenomena and their laws, the Buddha investigated the internal laws governing how consciousness interacts with sense objects, how feelings arise, how perception labels things, and how mental reactions like craving or aversion shape our reality and lead to distress. His science was focused on the inner world of experience. Finally, some thinkers, like Arthur Schopenhauer, looked inward for a driving force, proposing a fundamental, restless will as the engine of reality. This idea of an inner drive connects interestingly to the Buddha's teaching on tanha, often translated as craving or thirst. The Buddha identified tanha as a powerful inner force, a key condition driving the cycle of suffering and rebirth. However, there's a crucial difference. While Schopenhauer saw the will as a fundamental, perhaps unchangeable aspect of reality, the Buddha taught that tanha, although powerful, is a condition that arises based on other conditions, like feeling and ignorance. And because it's conditioned, it can be understood, weakened, and ultimately ceased through insight and practice. The Buddha's path offered a way out of the suffering driven by this inner thirst, unlike Schopenhauer's more pessimistic view. Each of these Western approaches offers valuable perspectives, but the Buddha's consistent focus on observable present conditions, the mind's role, and the practical aim of ending suffering sets his path apart. Part 3. The Buddha's Clue. Everything depends. Having seen how different paths often search for a single ultimate reason or describe the how of existence through external laws, the Buddha offered a different kind of clue. His insight directs our attention away from a fixed starting point and towards the dynamic way things actually come into being, moment by moment. The key, he suggested, lies in understanding conditions. This core principle is known in the early texts as paticca samuppada, often translated as dependent arising or conditioned genesis. At its heart, it's a very simple but profound observation. Nothing exists all by itself, completely independent and unchanging. Everything we experience, every object, every feeling, every thought, arises because certain conditions are present. And just as things arise due to conditions, they cease when those conditions change or disappear. Nothing comes from nothing, and nothing exists in isolation. It's all interconnected. Think about something as simple as a candle flame. For the flame to exist, several conditions need to be met. You need the wax of the candle, a wick, and oxygen in the air. If you take away the wax, the flame goes out. If you smother it and remove the oxygen, the flame goes out. If the wick burns down, the flame ceases. The flame doesn't have its own separate, independent existence. It depends entirely on these conditions coming together. Its existence is conditional. This isn't just true for flames. The Buddha pointed out that this principle applies to everything, including our own experiences. The way this principle is often expressed in the texts captures this dynamic flow. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. This isn't just describing a chain reaction that happened long ago, like one domino knocking over the next in a historical sequence leading to the present. It's primarily describing a process happening right now, in this very moment. The presence of certain factors now leads to the arising of other factors now. The feeling you have right now depends on conditions present right now. The thoughts appearing in your mind right now are conditioned by what you just saw, heard, or remembered a moment ago. It's a living, immediate process. This view is quite different from searching for one single prime mover or an ultimate sufficient reason that stands outside the system as a fixed origin point. Dependent arising describes reality as an ongoing, interconnected flow of conditioned phenomena, without needing a separate creator or absolute beginning. We can actually start to notice this principle of conditionality operating all around us in our daily lives if we pay attention. Think about your mood. How you feel often depends on conditions like how well you slept last night, whether you've eaten recently, the weather outside, or perhaps a conversation you just had. Change one of those conditions, get some rest, have a meal, see the sun come out, and your mood might shift. Think about plant life. A plant grows and thrives depending on conditions like sunlight, water, soil nutrients, and the right temperature. Remove one of these essential conditions, and the plant will wither. Even simple physical events work this way. A ball moves because it was struck. A sound is heard because something vibrated, creating sound waves that reached your ear. These aren't deep philosophical mysteries. They are observable realities. The Buddhist teaching encourages us to see this pattern not just in the external world, but also, crucially, within our own minds and experiences. Recognizing this interconnectedness, this dependence on conditions, isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's something we can directly observe. It requires us to slow down and pay attention to how things actually arise and pass away in our experience. What conditions lead to a feeling of happiness? What conditions precede a moment of frustration? What am I seeing, hearing, or thinking that leads to this particular thought arising now? Actively looking for these conditions is a core part of the practice the Buddha taught. It's not always easy. Our minds often jump to conclusions or focus on the thing itself, rather than the conditions that allowed it to appear. Seeing dependent arising clearly requires consistent effort, patience, and a willingness to observe our experience honestly, without immediately judging or reacting. This understanding of conditionality forms the foundation for seeing how our own minds become involved in shaping our reality. Part 4. What your mind does with something. Understanding that everything arises based on conditions, as we saw, is the first step. Now, we turn our attention inward to see what typically happens within our own minds when these conditioned phenomena, sights, sounds, sensations, thoughts, appear in our awareness. The Buddha pointed out a crucial sequence in how we process our experience, a sequence that often happens so quickly we don't even notice it. First, due to various conditions coming together, phenomena simply appear. Light waves strike our eyes, sound waves vibrate our eardrums, an object touches our skin, a thought pops into our head. At this initial stage, it's like raw data entering our system. There's just the seeing, the hearing, the touching, the thinking, a bare awareness of something present. For a fleeting instant, perhaps, there isn't yet a story attached, just the raw impact on the senses or the mind. A shape, a color, a sound, a pressure. This initial contact happens because the necessary conditions are met. The sense organ is functioning, the object is present, and consciousness connects the two. But the mind rarely stays with just this raw data. Almost immediately, a second stage kicks in: perception and feeling. Perception, called sanya in the early texts, is the process of recognizing, identifying, and labeling what has appeared. That shape and color become a tree. That sound becomes a car horn. That pressure becomes a hand on my arm. That thought becomes worry about tomorrow. Our mind draws on past experiences and concepts to categorize and make sense of the raw input. Alongside this labeling, or sometimes even slightly before it, arises feeling, known as Vedana. This isn't complex emotion yet, but a more basic feeling tone associated with the experience. Is it pleasant? unpleasant, or just neutral? The perception of sunshine on my skin might immediately bring a pleasant Vedana. The perception of loud drilling noise likely brings an unpleasant Vedana. Seeing a plain wall might just bring a neutral Vedana. This combination of labeling the phenomenon, sanya, and reacting with a basic feeling tone, Vedana, happens incredibly fast, coloring our experience almost instantly. The world is no longer just raw data. It's now populated with things we recognize and have immediate gut feelings about. This is where a third, critical step often occurs, the one the Buddha identified as a major source of our difficulties. This step is called upadana, which translates as clinging, grasping, or attachment. Having perceived something and felt a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling towards it, the mind then tends to grasp onto that experience. It adds a layer of I, me, and mine. The pleasant feeling isn't just pleasant. It becomes, I like this. I want more of this. My happiness depends on this lasting. The unpleasant feeling isn't just unpleasant. It becomes, I hate this. I need to get rid of this. This is ruining my peace. Even neutral feelings can lead to clinging, perhaps through boredom. I need something interesting. Or ignoring things we deem unimportant to me. Upadana is this mental act of grabbing hold, identifying with the experience, making it personal, solidifying it as part of me or mine. It's like instinctively clenching your fist around water. You try to hold on to something fluid and changing, but the effort itself creates tension, and ultimately, the water slips away anyway. This clinging is often driven by the underlying feeling tone, Vedana. We cling to pleasant feelings, try to push away unpleasant ones, and often ignore or feel restless with neutral ones. This habit of clinging, of making experiences personal and trying to control them, I want, I don't want, this is me, is deeply ingrained. It's the process by which the conditioned, flowing nature of reality gets mentally solidified into fixed things that we relate to with desire or aversion. Recognizing this deep habit of upadana in action requires honest and patient self-observation. It means watching how our mind reacts to sights, sounds, feelings, and thoughts. Do I immediately want more of this pleasant feeling? Do I tense up against this unpleasant sensation? Do I start weaving stories about me and my problems around a particular thought? Seeing this process clearly, without judging ourselves, is essential. It's the beginning of understanding how our own mental habits contribute significantly to our sense of struggle, stress, and dissatisfaction. It shows us that our experience of something isn't just about what's out there. It's profoundly shaped by what our own mind does with it. Part 5. The Buddha's Answer, Seeing Clearly, Letting Go. So, we've seen how things arise based on conditions, and how our minds typically react by labeling, feeling, and then clinging to those experiences. This brings us to the heart of the Buddha's perspective on that deep question we started with. Why does anything exist? His answer isn't about a moment of creation long ago, or an external force imposing reality upon us. Instead, it points directly to the process we've just explored. The Buddha's big answer, in essence, is this. Things exist in our felt reality as solid and meaningful parts of our world because of a two-part process. First, conditions cause phenomena, sights, sounds, thoughts, feelings, to constantly arise and pass away. Second, our minds habitually cling, upadana, to these fleeting appearances, grasping onto them, identifying with them, giving them a false sense of permanence and personal importance. This is me. This is mine. I need this. I hate this. Existence, particularly as a source of struggle or dissatisfaction, is intimately tied to this combination of conditioned arising and mental grasping. This view offers a dynamic understanding of reality as we experience it. It's different from seeking a single static reason out there, like an ultimate creator or first cause that set everything in motion once and for all. It's also different from simply saying the ultimate origin is unknowable, a mystery beyond our reach. The Buddha's insight focuses on the presently occurring conditions, both external and internal, especially the mental habit of clinging, that continuously shape our sense of something being here. The problem of existence, the suffering often associated with it, isn't inherent in the phenomena themselves, but arises largely from our habitual reaction of clinging to what is inherently impermanent and conditioned. Understanding this isn't just about agreeing with an idea intellectually. The real aim is experiential insight, seeing this process happen within ourselves. It's about noticing, through direct observation, how conditions lead to feelings, how feelings trigger craving or aversion, and how this clinging leads to tension, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. The teaching of dependent arising outlines this chain clearly. Clinging leads to further becoming, birth, aging, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Seeing this link clearly, understanding how grasping onto impermanent experiences inevitably leads to suffering because those experiences will change, allows us to start loosening that grip. Liberation, in this context, means freedom. It's the freedom that comes from understanding this process so deeply that the habit of clinging weakens and eventually dissolves. It's finding peace, not by controlling the world or stopping change, but by changing our relationship to experience, letting go of the need to grasp. This kind of deep understanding doesn't usually dawn overnight. It unfolds gradually through sustained practice. The path the Buddha laid out involves cultivating certain qualities, developing ethical conduct, living skillfully and harmlessly, training the mind in concentration and mindfulness, paying careful, non-judgmental attention, and developing wisdom, seeing directly into the nature of experience, including impermanence and conditionality. Seeing dependent arising and the nature of clinging isn't a single aha moment for most people, but a gradual clearing of confusion, like morning mist slowly burning off under the sun. As one text says, seeing dependent arising is seeing the Dhamma, the fundamental truth of how things work. Therefore, this path requires diligence and patience. There are no magical shortcuts to understanding the mind and freeing oneself from deeply ingrained habits. It calls for sustained, gentle effort, the effort to keep observing our experience with honesty and curiosity, the effort to notice when we are clinging, and to gently let go, again and again. It's about cultivating awareness in our daily lives, watching the rise and fall of thoughts and feelings, noticing the conditions involved without getting swept away or judging ourselves harshly. The encouragement is to become a patient observer of your own inner world. Through this sustained, gentle observation, the insights described by the Buddha can move from being concepts to becoming your own lived understanding, potentially changing how you relate to everything.